US President Donald Trump has said the confines of a ceasefire deal between Russia and Ukraine are in the making. Mr. Trump was speaking ahead of talks in Saudi Arabia aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. His comments follow a pledge by EU leaders to continue financial and military support of Ukraine.
This was Odessa in the early hours. Russia, which says it has stopped attacks on energy infrastructure, fired waves of Iranian-built Shahed drones against the Black Sea port, causing injuries and multiple fires in commercial and residential areas.
Everything was exploding, like in a movie. I can't count the losses yet.
Odessa will be key for Ukraine's exports if Black Sea shipping is to be restored as part of a possible ceasefire plan. Technical teams from Russia, Ukraine and the US will discuss that plan in Saudi Arabia on Monday.
I've been having very good discussions, as you know, with President Zelensky and with President Putin. I think we have the confines of a deal. I hope we have the confines of a deal.
One of the first steps to peace could involve a silence in the sky, a ban on airstrikes targeting civilian infrastructure.
It would be great if the meeting resulted in something that brings us closer to a complete ceasefire, and the result will depend on whether both sides genuinely want this or are merely pretending to.
Ukraine's president welcomed the Czech leader Petr Pavel, a staunch supporter who's spearheading efforts to supply Kyiv with 1 million artillery shells. In Brussels last night, there was no agreement among the EU leaders on an immediate €5 billion fund for high-caliber ammunition. But senior figures insisted the major shift in EU defence spending would help Ukraine. With both sides accusing the other of breaching the ceasefire on energy targets, Ukraine last night hit a gas pumping station in Russia's Kursk region. Despite the talk of peace, Russia's war in Ukraine appears as intense as ever. Tanya Reut, RT News.
Our Europe editor Tony Connolly is in Brussels and he's been telling us that while EU leaders are keen to show a united front, differences are emerging on what form increased defence spending should take.
Well, there was once again a very strong commitment to continued financial and military support for Ukraine. But there are gaps appearing now in the debate, at least, as to how Ukraine should be supported. There is talk of a European peacekeeping or reassuring force post-ceasefire. But there is a debate now on whether member states should get into Eurobonds, that is joint borrowing, rather than the simple options of the Defence White Paper, which would, in effect, potentially add to member states' debt levels, and countries like Italy, France and Spain are reluctant to get into that. Also politically, a country like Spain, a country like Italy, they have in their coalitions hard left or hard right parties who are naturally sympathetic to Russia. They've opposed military support for Ukraine, they've opposed sanctions against Russia, and those countries like Spain, Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, again reluctant to talk about wholesale rearmament of Europe. He says the risk to Spain is not Russian troops coming over the Pyrenees, it's more in a broader definition of security like civil protection, climate change, migration. So these are the debates that are starting to open up. Separately, there's a report that some of the biggest military powers in Europe are now talking about sharing the burden from the US, taking the bulk of the burden of NATO away from the United States over a gradual 10-year period in order to try and placate some of the concerns that President Trump has. We'll see more about that debate in the coming days.